The biggest disappointment of playing a bear druid over the last couple of years hasn't been the nerfs, as big as they've been at times. It hasn't been the bad tier set bonuses or the very poorly structured druid class talent tree. It's been the death of cat weaving. I love cat weaving. I started playing bear druid in vanilla because I love the idea of finding a balance between tanking and dealing damage. That has always been my favorite tank playstyle. I kind of led the charge on playing Brewmaster Monk as a DPS in Mists of Pandaria. I've spent a lot of time straight up tanking raid bosses in cat form, and losing that for most of Shadowlands and all of Dragonflight has been painful. But now it's back. Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about the newly announced Druid of the Claw Druid talent tree. But before I do, if you enjoy this video or find it informative, please like and subscribe. Alright, let's take a look at this tree. The top talent in the tree is Massive Attack. This has a different effect for Feral and Guardian, but the same basic proc. Ignition is just based off of auto attacks. When you auto attack, you have a chance to make either your next Ferocious Bite if you're Feral, or your next Maul if you're Guardian become Massive Attack. Massive Attack as Feral basically just adds Cleave onto your Ferocious Bite, and as Guardian, it adds Cleave onto your Maul. Okay, that sort of sounds like Raise, except if we look over here and look a little bit ahead, we see that Maul and Raise damage are increased by 10% by Bestial Strength, so Raise is still in the game, but you get random Maul procs that also deal AoE damage? Bit strange, isn't it? On the left-hand side of the tree, Fount of Strength makes your maximum energy and rage be increased by 20. Now, in terms of like sims and stuff, this is the kind of talent that doesn't show up as any sort of a DPS increase at all, 0 throughput increase, but the ability to like hit the cap of 100, it's not that hard to hit 100 rage or 100 energy, especially when you're playing like Feral Druid and you have things like Tiger's Fury that can restore a bunch of energy all at once. So having that cap be larger means that there's less chance of wasting any, less chance of overcapping, so it actually is useful, and it's just more quality of life than a straight throughput increase, but it's nice. Also, 10% more healing from Frenzied Regen is pretty good. Presumably that would also interact with Innate Resolve, which can increase your Frenzied Regen healing by up to 120% based on your missing health, so that could be a pretty substantial increase on just how much healing you're getting out of Frenzied Regens. That's good. Okay, so Massive Attack is kind of a little boring here, right? It just makes those two skills turn into cleaves. Dreadful Wound adds a little bit more value onto it. Massive Attack also inflicts a bleed that causes extra damage over 6 seconds and makes the enemy deal 5% less damage to you. Now, presumably that's applied in AoE, that sort of seems like how it would work, and fortunately for Bear Druids, it's not affected by Circle of Life and Death, this talent here that makes all your dots deal damage in 25% less time. That's not applied, so you are actually getting the full seconds of that damage over time, and more importantly, the damage reduction effect. There's also a second effect for Feral. If a Dreadful Wound benefiting from Tiger's Fury is reapplied, the new Dreadful Wound deals damage as if Tiger's Fury was active. So that's sort of like, dot snapshotting, dot extension, which is good. That's kind of essential to the whole Feral playstyle, so it's good that they remembered that and kept that bit of not just flavor but throughput value in there. Okay, Bestial Strength makes it so that your Ferocious Bite deals 5% more damage, which is good in single target, and your Primal Wrath deals 100% increased direct damage. Now that's the kind of thing that sounds good until you stop and take a look at a couple of Feral Druid logs in Mythic Plus and AoE situations and remember, oh yeah, the initial hit of Primal Wrath is like maybe 3 to 5% of your total damage. So I guess this is 3 to 5% more damage with Primal Wrath, like total damage coming from Primal Wrath, which is, it's okay, but it's not a huge amount. 5% more Ferocious Bite damage is pretty good in single target though, and I guess fairly good in AoE, given that Massive Attack is basically just an AoE Ferocious Bite. For Bear Druid, it's really simple. 10% more Maul and Raise damage is very good. That's a lot of damage. We like to see that, nice and simple, just like we like. Wild Shape Mastery is really what makes everything start to work here. It makes it so that Iron Fur and Frenzied Regen will persist if you shift into cat form. So this means that as a Bear Druid, you can use all your skills, you can use your Mangle and your Thrash and all of your Maul procs, you've burned all your rage out, you've cast Iron Fur once or twice, and then you can shift into cat form and hit enemies with Rake and Rip and start using like cat form skills. And unlike in the past where you would have to like survival instincts or bark skin to be able to do that and live while tanking a boss, the Iron Fur stays up and you're able to retain 80% of the bear form armor and health for the next 6 seconds. So that's enough time to be in bear form, tanking. You know, maybe the boss doesn't really do anything other than like auto attacks or just very basic stuff. Maybe they're casting spells on other people. Perfect time to switch into cat form, throw some bleeds on, switch back to bear form, and you're fine. And you actually get a defensive buff out of this. For 6 seconds after entering bear form, you heal for 10% of the damage you've taken over 8 seconds. That's pretty good. Like getting basically 10% heal on all of the damage you take, that's not too bad. So you have not just an offensive justification for cat weaving, the most normal reason you would do cat weaving, but you actually have somewhat of a defensive justification to do it as well. Like if you really wanted to play as defensively and safely as possible, you probably still can justify switching into cat form when the boss isn't actually attacking you and then switching back into bear form just to get that extra healing based on damage taken. Ruthless Aggression makes it so that using a massive attack using that transformed Maul or Ferocious Bite will give you 20% increased attack speed for the next 6 seconds. Now, depending on how often the massive attack procs occur, that might be a substantial increase to your auto attack damage, and I think this has value both for Bear Druid and Cat Druid. So for Feral Druid, Cat Druid, you have Omen of Clarity, which gives all your auto attacks a chance to give you that Omen of Clarity proc, making your next Shred, Thrash, or Brutal Slash be energy free and do more damage. Pretty great. We like that. Really nice talent. One of like my favorite designs of Druid that I've loved since, I guess, all the way back in Vanilla Burning Crusade era. Bear Druid also has value from auto attacking faster though, in the form of Tooth and Claw. All your auto attacks have a 20% chance to make your next Maul or Raise deal 40% more damage, be free of rage, and make the enemy deal 15% less damage to you. So getting 20% more auto attacks, depending on how good of uptime you're able to maintain on this, if you're able to maintain 100% uptime, that's basically 20-ish% more auto attacks, depending on how much haste you have, maybe more like 10, 15, or 12 to 15%. But, you know, if the uptime is maybe only more in the like 50% range, that's still like 6 to 8% more uptime or more auto attacks, more uptime on effects like Omen of Clarity and Tooth and Claw. So I think this is pretty good. By comparison, Killing Strikes makes it so that Massive Attack just gives you a 5% agility buff and 20% more armor from Iron Fur for the next 6 seconds, which sounds good, but actually doesn't have that much defensive value. There's a lot of diminishing returns on armor, so this might be a couple percent more damage reduction at most. I really don't think it's that huge, but the agility is nice. Getting a damage bonus out of just using your mauls is pretty good. Additionally, there is an extra bonus. Your first Tiger's Fury after entering combat makes your next Ferocious Bite a massive attack, and your next Mangle after entering combat makes your next Maul a massive attack. So you're guaranteed to get a very early on massive attack, which is, for Bear Druid at least, being able to get that big blast of AoE damage from the massive attack and apply the Dreadful Wound so you're bleeding enemies and reducing their damage dealt to you. I think that's pretty good for establishing early threat. Early on in a pull, especially in AoE, is kind of the point where Bear Druid is the weakest. So I think this talent could be pretty good for AoE situations, but as we can kind of see here, this talent really looks more like a single target sort of talent tree for Bear Druid. I think this is going to be the raid tree, and then the other tree will wind up being the better one for Mythic Plus. So I think Ruthless Aggression probably winds up being better in raid fights and basically just better for all the situations where you would want to play this tree. Pax Endurance is just very simple group utility. Your Stampeding Roar is 25% longer. It lasts for a couple seconds longer. That winds up being pretty good for any situation in raid where you need to make the group move around for a while. Instead of moving for 8 seconds, I guess they move for 10. That's great. Okay, here we have Empowered Shapeshifting, which I think is probably the most interesting thing for cat form. You're able to cast Frenzied Regen while you're in cat form for 40 energy. This is interesting. I mean, it's potentially a lot of healing for Cat Druid, which frankly, Feral Druid in cat form already has a lot of healing with the free instant regrowths that you're able to throw into yourself, but being able to add Frenzied Regen on top of that is I mean, it's pretty interesting. And then getting just a baseline 5% more swipe, shred, and mangle damage is good too. Being able to shift into bear form and get 4% more magic damage reduction is okay. I don't really think that's much of a game changer though for feral. For bear druid, just getting 4% more magic damage reduction all the time is pretty interesting. I don't think you're really, as a bear druid, ever going to be wanting to shift into cat form to use frenzied regen. Just stay in bear form. But 5% more mangle damage and I guess swipe damage is something anyways. Really, I think Wild Power Surge is a much more interesting concept for bears. Now, for cat druids, for feral, shred and swipe grant you a resign potential, and when you're at 8 stacks of resign potential, the next time you switch into bear form, your next mangle or swipe will deal double damage and generate 15 extra rage. I don't think that's very good. Double damage on your mangle, maybe that's something you could weave in when you're low on energy, and so it is justifiable and it actually winds up being useful, but I think that doesn't seem as great as the alternative for bear druid. Mangle grants feline potential when you have 6 stacks. The next time you transform into cat form, you gain 5 combo points instantly, and your next ferocious bite or rip deals 50% increased damage for its full duration. Obviously, the duration part doesn't matter for ferocious bite, but it's letting you know that it does the normal cat druid snapshotting thing with the rip. This is good, and being able to do that every 6 mangles means that in a normal single target raid situation where you're using Berserk effectively, you're using your mangle procs, as soon as they become available, that means you're gonna get one of these feline potential procs about every 20 to 25 seconds. Now that's in current good gear. Maybe it would be more like every 25 to 30 seconds in new expansion bad gear, but that's still pretty close to enough to maintain rip just on its own, just from this talent. Full uptime on rip. That gives you the opportunity to also then get in rake on your own, spend extra combo points on ferocious bites, or maybe spend the combo points from feline potential on ferocious bites and maintain rip on your own with rake and shred. And yeah, there's a lot of potential here. Definitely a lot of damage potential out of Wild Power Surge. Aggravate Wounds makes it for feral so that every finishing move, so Primal Wrath, Rip, and Ferocious Bite, Shred, Thrash, and Swipe, extend the duration of Dreadful Wounds by 0.4 of a second up to 6 additional seconds, so that would take 15 procs, I suppose. But you would be capable of extending this debuff right here, Dreadful Wound, the bleed that is applied by your empowered Ferocious Bite and also gives you a bit of damage reduction, and then the basic same sort of effect for Bear Druid. Every Maul, Raise, Mangle, Thrash, and Swipe you cast extends the duration of your Dreadful Wounds by 0.4 of a second up to 6 extra seconds. So the idea here is that you would be able to maintain a pretty high uptime on this debuff, especially if this counts multiple thrashes from Flashing Claws. Like, let's say you cast Thrash and you have Flashing Claws and it triggers twice. Maybe you get 3 thrashes out of a single cast. If you're able to get 3 hits of this out of a single cast of Thrash while also continuing to cast Maul and Swipe and Mangle and so on, I think you could very realistically actually wind up getting pretty close to full duration extension on this, fairly close, and that's pretty good. I think another thing that, kind of jumping ahead to the end here, but I think another thing that's going on here with this talent tree, as we can see, is that all of these talents synergize nicely with the Bear Druid talent tree that is currently used in the current state of the class without having to mix things around, make massive revamps to how the class is currently spec'd and in a meta setup. And that's really interesting to not have to sort of relearn anything to gain all of this new power. That's very different from the other Bear Druid talent tree that we've looked at already. Okay, let's move on to Strike for the Heart. Shred, Swipe, and Mangle's crit chance and crit damage are increased by 8%. That seems like a pretty good damage increase. It definitely makes crit a tiny bit better as a damage stat, since it's also increasing crit damage on some of your main skills. It doesn't really seem like it does anything mechanically, though. There's not really any sort of interaction with Mangle critting other than just that it deals more damage, and that's cool. That's good. but it's not very good for AoE for Bear Druid. It's not very good for AoE for Cat Druid either. It really is just single target damage. It does give you more combo points though if your shreds crit, so that's good. Tear Down the Mighty by comparison reduces the cooldown of Feral Frenzy by 5 seconds. Not all that much, and the cooldown of Pulverize by 5 seconds for Bear Druid. Pulverize is already a very niche talent that, unless they were to rework it back to the way where it used to function, where it was a damage reduction effect that would apply to you and reduce damage you take from all sources, as it currently exists, where it's sort of like a medium style cooldown single target damage reduction that kind of functions like a shield wall, like sort of like Fiery Brand, like a shield wall that you apply to the enemy specifically. And then it has this like very strange, you know, a lot of pathing required to get over here. Really doesn't work in any sort of AoE situations. Not really all that great of a talent. So shaving the cooldown from 45 seconds down to 40, that's not changing anything for anybody really. As a Bear Druid, I don't think that talent would probably ever get used by anybody who isn't screwing around, basically. And finally, we have Claw Rampage. For Feral Druid, when you're in Berserk, and I guess for Bear Druid too, but for Feral Druid, it makes Shred, Swipe, and Thrash have a 25% chance to make your next Ferocious Bite become Massive Attack. Bear Druid, same deal. If you're in Berserk or Incarnation, I assume it's going to be the same for Feral. Reasonable assumption there. It'll make your Mangle, Swipe, and Thrash give you a 25% chance to make your next Maul become a Massive Attack. Now, again, a thing I'm curious about is that like per Thrash, like time you press the button and that's it? Or if Flashing Claws triggers a couple of times, are you getting a 25% chance on each of those? I would assume probably the latter, which is pretty good. That means that this really synergizes nicely with the current left side of the tree talent setup. Probably does mean you wouldn't play with Galactic Guardian and Twin Moonfire, although I don't know, but there's a real possibility that a heavy Thrash setup would work really well to accentuate the value of things like Aggravate Wounds and Claw Rampage. Actually, you've really come around on the Galactic Guardian and Twin Moon setup in Mythic Plus, so I don't really know how I would feel about making that trade-off, but in single target you wouldn't run Twin Moons, so you could run Galactic Guardian 1 point and Flashing Claws 1 point, or I guess 2 points, and not run Raise, and then there you go. That would work pretty well. This talent tree really does seem like it would be pretty good for cat weaving and single target damage specifically. It really has a lot to offer there, and depending on what kind of uptime you can get on Dreadful Wound, maybe you're getting a full 5% damage reduction out of this talent tree. I think that's potentially pretty good. Bear Druids don't really need a lot of extra damage reduction. The main issue that they've had is just that their current tier set bonus is really bad, and you know, their damage isn't really all that spectacular in raids. So if this is able to, especially with Wild Power Surge, if this is able to really bring them back up into a level of relevance for like a high skill level player who is really maximizing every aspect of the class, being able to cat weave really effectively, make use of all of their rage and all of their energy pool, and just use every single aspect of the class tree of the massive amount of skills that you have as a druid, I think it could actually wind up being a really good tank in raids, which is, that's a bit of a change of pace for them in recent times, but it's really, really appealing. Like it's basically what I've wanted for a long time, and I am really excited by this. I think the possibility of playing this in raids in the upcoming expansion seems incredibly fun. Like one of the most fun things I've seen for tanks in a long, long time. All right, I think that covers it. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Bye.